If you had 1 minute to live, what would you do? I had no answer. Not then. Not in that moment. But I knew one thing, I wasn't prepared for the question. Not by a long shot. You see, most people live their entire lives thinking death is something that happens to other people. You tell yourself that one day, when it's your time, you'll be ready. But trust me, you won't be. Nobody is. Not really. My name is John Miller. I'm 68 years old. And up until that moment, the moment that changed everything, I lived my life like most people do. Busy. Focused on work. On family. On getting by. And then. I didn't. It was just another regular Tuesday morning, or so I thought. I had been feeling unwell for a while, but, like most men my age, I shrugged it off. Just getting older, I'd tell myself. It's nothing to worry about. But that Tuesday was different. The pain in my chest felt too sharp, too persistent. I ended up in the emergency room, and within hours, I was on the operating table. My heart was failing. My body, no longer responding. I remember it clearly. I was lying there, waiting for the anesthesia to take over. The nurses were busy. The doctors were talking in hushed tones. Then, in the midst of all the beeping and buzzing, I heard the words I never thought I would hear. His pulse is gone. The room went quiet. I couldn't tell you how long I was gone. A few seconds. A few minutes. Or maybe, it was much longer than that. But I do know this, something happened. Something shifted. I had no awareness of my body, no sense of time, no pain. And then, the silence. A deep, all-encompassing silence that felt, strangely peaceful. I wasn't afraid. Not in the way you might expect. You see, I had always believed, like many, that when we die, it's the end. Game over. No more. No second chances. Maybe a few comforting thoughts or memories as you drift away, but then, darkness. But that wasn't what I felt. I could hear a soft, almost melodic hum, faint but persistent. The hum wasn't from the hospital machines or the beeping of my heart monitor. No, this was different. This was real. Alive. As if the universe itself was alive, pulsing in time with some ancient rhythm. And then, I felt it. I felt my soul, my very being, leave my body. It wasn't like a jolt or a shock. No, it was more like, floating. Drifting upward. I could feel myself rising, not with any force, but effortlessly. My body, so heavy and fragile just moments before, was now light, lighter than air. I moved, but I wasn't aware of any physical movements. It was as if I was just being. As I drifted upward, I glanced down. I saw myself. My body, still lying on the operating table, surrounded by the sterile white lights of the hospital room. I could see the faces of the doctors and nurses, their eyes wide with concern. But none of it mattered. I wasn't there. Not anymore. And as I continued to float upwards, I saw something else. Something that I can't quite explain, but I know was real. There was light. Bright, radiant light, like nothing I had ever seen before. It wasn't harsh, blinding. Instead, it was warm, soothing, like a welcoming embrace. I could feel it pulling me closer, inviting me in. The hum grew louder, more distinct. It became a melody. A song, ancient and beautiful, that resonated in my very soul. The light, I knew, was the source of it. It wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a thing. It was alive. It was good. I didn't have the words to describe it then, but now, I know. I was being drawn toward something. Something beyond words. I wanted to stay there, in that light. In that warmth. It felt like home, like where I truly belonged. But as I moved closer to it, something changed. A voice. It was soft, yet it reverberated through me like a gentle breeze brushing across a vast ocean. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Clearer than anything I had ever heard in life. You can stay, or you can return. That was the choice. And, at that moment, I felt torn. On the one hand, I wanted to stay in that light, forever free of pain, free of worry. But on the other hand, I knew, deep down, somewhere, I had unfinished business. The voice didn't pressure me. It simply gave me the option. It's funny, you know, because in life, we think we're in control. We think we make all the decisions. But in that moment, I realized just how little control I really had. Death doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't offer explanations. It just is. I wasn't ready to go. Not yet. And so, I made my choice. I chose to return. But it wasn't easy. You can't just switch from one existence to another and not feel it. It was like being pulled back into a body I hadn't inhabited in what felt like years. The sensation was overwhelming. The cold, the pain, the weight of it all hit me like a tidal wave. I could feel the pulse of my heart begin again, sluggish and unsteady at first, but then gradually, it picked up pace. My eyes snapped open, and there they were, the bright, sterile lights of the hospital room. I was back. I was alive. But something was different. Something had changed. I had died, and what I had experienced, what I had felt, changed everything. I couldn't explain it to the doctors. I couldn't even explain it to my wife, Barbara, who was by my side, holding my hand, waiting for me to wake up. They all thought I had just been in a deep sleep, but I knew better. I had been somewhere else. Somewhere real. And now, I had to live with that knowledge. But the truth is, no one could understand what I had been through. They couldn't feel the light, the peace, the love. They couldn't hear the song I'd heard, the one that still echoed in the very depths of my soul. I was back, yes. But I wasn't the same. And as I lay there in that hospital bed, trying to make sense of it all, I had one thought that would stick with me for the rest of my life. I had met something, or someone, who had changed everything. And I wasn't sure I would ever be the same again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I don't know exactly when it happened. One moment, I was in that cold, sterile hospital room, feeling the heaviness of my own body and the pressure of the world on my shoulders. The next moment, it was like everything I had ever known, everything I had ever been, just stopped. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way you might expect. No bright flash or loud sound. There was no terrifying sensation or a jolt of panic. It wasn't a sudden shock to the system. It was more like floating. Imagine, if you can, the feeling of waking from a dream, but in reverse. Instead of waking up into your body, I felt myself leaving it. Slowly, as though the weight of my own physical form was no longer mine to bear. I was no longer me, not in the way I had always understood myself. There was no pain, no discomfort. In fact, I felt lighter than air, as though I had shed all the burdens of my aging body, the aches, the tiredness, the worry. It was as if I had always been floating just beneath the surface of my skin, and now I was free. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. There were no walls, no floors, no ceilings. Everything was vast and endless, like floating in the middle of a vast, open sky. And yet, it wasn't frightening. There was no fear in the void. I looked down, instinctively, and that's when I saw it. My body. It was still on the operating table, motionless, eyes closed. It was a strange thing to see, almost like looking at someone else. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of concern, a trace of panic. That's me. That's my body. That's where I was. But it didn't last long. The sensation of floating up, of being untethered from the weight of my body, was too overwhelming. And I was suddenly aware of something else. A light. At first, it was just a small glimmer in the distance, barely perceptible, like the faintest star on a moonless night. But then, it began to grow. It wasn't a blinding light, not the way we imagine light on Earth, sharp and bright. It was warm, soothing, like sunlight filtered through the softest clouds. The light was alive. It felt like it had its own rhythm, its own pulse. And I felt drawn to it. Pulled toward it, with a force I couldn't explain, nor would I have wanted to resist. As I drifted closer, the light enveloped me. It wasn't like anything I had experienced on Earth. There were no words to describe it. It was like being wrapped in love. But it wasn't just the light. There was something else there, something beyond the light itself, something I couldn't see yet, but I could feel. It was as though the light itself was not a thing but a doorway, a gateway to something beyond my understanding. I didn't have time to analyze it, though, because as soon as I entered that light, something shifted. I was no longer alone. There were voices. Soft, distant, yet clear. Like whispers that brushed against my ears, but without the sound of words. I didn't hear them so much as I felt them. These voices weren't from people I knew. They weren't from my family, my friends, or anyone I had met in my life. They were other. Ancient. Benevolent. And I knew instinctively that they weren't speaking to me from any earthly place. They were speaking from a place beyond time. A place that existed before anything we know. And then, I felt it. A pull, a gentle tug, drawing me further into the light. I wasn't frightened. Not at all. I had no reason to be. This light felt like home. And in that moment, I was certain, there was no place I could be that was more right, more real, than this. But then, as I drew closer to it, something shifted. The light dimmed, just a little. The voices softened, as if waiting for something. And then, the words came. Clearer this time. You have a choice. I didn't know who was speaking, and I didn't need to. It wasn't a question that needed an answer. The choice wasn't something I could debate. Stay, or return. It was that simple. But it wasn't just a simple decision. It felt as though the weight of it was pressing against me, heavy and vast. As if every part of me had to consider something far greater than I had ever imagined. I wanted to stay. More than anything. But I also knew that if I stayed, I would leave something behind. Something unfinished. Something that I couldn't quite explain. There was a purpose, a mission, call it what you will, that still awaited me. I didn't know what that purpose was, not fully. But I knew it was there, calling me. The light, as peaceful and comforting as it was, didn't give me any answers. It didn't tell me what awaited me if I chose to stay. It just was. It was a reminder of the peace I had known before birth. The peace I had forgotten until this very moment. And in that quiet, I made my choice. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. There was something I had to do. Something I had to understand before I could let go. I turned away from the light, slowly. Gently. And as I did, I felt a weight on my chest, a sudden gravity pulling me back. It wasn't painful, but it was firm, like the sensation of waking up from a deep sleep. I had to return. And as I floated back toward my body, back toward the hospital bed, back toward the cold metal machines that had monitored me for so long, I felt an odd sense of relief. I was going back. But the question lingered, lingering like the softest echo, reverberating through my very being. What was this place? What was beyond this life? I didn't have answers. Not yet. But the moment I felt myself being pulled back into my body, a new sense of knowing washed over me. I wasn't the same. I couldn't be. I don't know how to explain it. I really don't. What I do know is that after I made the choice to return, everything changed. I didn't just wake up in that hospital room. I didn't just come back in the way I would have imagined. No, what I experienced as I regained consciousness was something far more profound. When I opened my eyes and looked around that sterile, white hospital room, it was as if I was seeing everything for the first time. The hospital bed beneath me felt strange, foreign. The beeping machines that were monitoring me seemed distant. I could hear them, yes, but the sounds were muted, as if they were coming from another world, not the one I was now part of. But it wasn't just the physical world that felt distant. It was like a veil had been drawn between me and the reality I had once known. The space around me, the world, was no longer the same. It was as if I was seeing with new eyes, not just literally but with an entirely different awareness. I could feel things I had never been able to feel before. When Barbara, my wife, walked into the room, I saw her as I had always seen her, but at the same time, I felt her in a way I couldn't explain. It was like her very presence was a vibration in the air that matched the rhythm of my own heart. I could sense her thoughts, her emotions, her fears. I could feel the warmth of her touch as she took my hand, but it wasn't just warmth. It was love. Pure, unfiltered, all-encompassing love. I had always loved Barbara, but now, in this new awareness, I could feel the depth of her love in a way that was almost overwhelming. And that wasn't the only change. It was as if all my senses had been heightened, elevated. The sounds around me weren't just sounds anymore. They were messages. Every beep of the machine, every rustle of a nurse's uniform, every word spoken by someone in the room, it all had meaning. It wasn't just noise. It was part of a larger, unseen symphony. When I closed my eyes again, I saw something else, something I couldn't have described before, but now, it was as clear as day. There was a presence. I didn't know what to call it. But it was like a weightless, peaceful being, standing just at the edge of my awareness. I couldn't see it with my physical eyes, but I knew it was there. I felt it with every fiber of my being. It was gentle, calming, like the softest breeze brushing across a field of tall grass. And somehow, I knew, that this presence had always been there, waiting for me. It was as if I had just awoken from a long sleep and had only now realized this presence had always been with me. It wasn't just an idea or a thought. It was something real. Something powerful. The more I tried to focus on it, the more I felt drawn to it, just like I had been drawn to the light. But this wasn't the same. This presence wasn't calling me to leave, to transcend. No, it was reminding me that I was not alone. And then, there was the sensation of knowing things I could never have known before. I knew my children, my grandchildren, needed me. But it was more than that. I knew their hearts. I could feel their hopes and fears, their joys and sorrows. I could sense their emotions as if they were my own, and it was overwhelming. I could feel their love, their struggles, their deepest longings, and in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before: life wasn't just about our own experiences. It was about the connection we had with others, the invisible threads that linked all of us together. It was like my entire perspective had expanded, like I was seeing the world through a wide-angle lens, one that captured not just my own life but the lives of everyone around me. I could see their pains, their joys, their paths, but I also understood that it wasn't just their story. It was all interconnected. Everything was. But the strangest thing of all, the thing I couldn't shake, was the message I felt deep within me. The light, the presence, whatever it was, it hadn't just been a dream or a fleeting experience. It was real. And it had a message for me. The message wasn't spoken. It wasn't even an image. It was a knowing, a deep, profound understanding that reached the very core of my being. You are not done yet. That was it. It wasn't a demand, nor a directive. It wasn't a question either. It was a statement of fact. I wasn't done yet. I didn't know what that meant. I couldn't make sense of it, not fully. I wasn't ready to accept it either. How could I be? How could anyone really comprehend a message like that after experiencing what I had? After coming so close to crossing over? But it was undeniable. It was true. And deep down, I felt an urgency in it. There was something left for me to do. Something I had to finish. Something I had to change in myself, or in the world, or maybe both. But I didn't know what that something was yet. Not in this moment. The feeling of being connected to the world, of being tethered to something greater, didn't fade. It lingered, surrounding me like an invisible cocoon. And as I lay there, my body aching from the return, I realized something else. I had been given a glimpse into something far beyond our understanding. Life wasn't just what we saw, what we touched, what we could measure. It wasn't even about what we did in the time we had on this earth. It was about love. About connection. About what lies beyond. And I would never see the world the same way again. But just as this realization began to settle within me, the nagging doubt crept back in. What was I supposed to do with this new awareness? How could I live in this world, with its harshness, its imperfections, its limitations, while knowing what I had seen? How could I return to a life that seemed so small and ordinary after having touched the infinite? I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew this: I couldn't forget what I had experienced. I couldn't just go back to the way things were. I had been changed. And somehow, I had been given a mission, whether I understood it or not. And I would find out soon enough what it was. I woke up in my hospital bed with a heavy heart. My body, still sore and stiff from the surgery, seemed foreign to me. I couldn't move easily, and every breath felt labored, as if I had to fight to take in the air. But that wasn't what lingered. What lingered was the feeling, the knowing, that something fundamental had changed inside me. I was different. And yet, I didn't know how to explain it. Barbara was there, sitting by my side, her face drawn with worry. She had been by my side through all of this. She had seen me struggle with health issues for years, and now here I was, on the edge of death, only to come back alive. It didn't make sense. She took my hand gently, squeezing it as she had always done when things were hard. But I couldn't meet her eyes. I couldn't even look at her the same way. She was there, and I loved her with all my heart. But somehow, after what I had experienced, she felt so far away. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't put it into words. But my connection to her, my connection to everyone, had shifted in ways that were hard to grasp. "John," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady, "you're awake. The doctor said you made it through, you're going to be fine." I wanted to say something, to reassure her. I wanted to tell her I was okay. But how could I? How could I tell her that I had seen the other side? How could I explain the things I had felt, the love I had encountered, the peace that had washed over me? How could I explain that I had met something? Someone? That I had been given a message? I couldn't. Not yet. Not in a way she could understand. But I could feel her waiting, her eyes full of unspoken questions. She needed answers. She wanted me to be the same person I had always been, the same John who had been a good husband, a father, a man of routine. But I wasn't him anymore. I didn't know who I was. The question I had asked myself so many times before, about life and death, felt completely irrelevant now. It didn't matter whether I believed in the afterlife. What mattered was what I had felt. What mattered was the truth I had experienced. I looked at Barbara then, my heart heavy with words I couldn't say. "I don't know what happened, Barb," I whispered, my voice cracking. "But I can't. I can't be the same. Not after what I've seen." She looked at me, confused and maybe even a little scared. But I wasn't surprised. Who could understand something like this? Who could grasp a reality so far beyond our comprehension? "I know you're scared, but I'm here with you," she said, her voice full of concern. "We'll figure this out together." But the truth was, I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I had seen the other side. I had felt the light. The peace. The love. I had known what I had to do. But how could I explain that to her, to anyone? I wanted to stay in that peace. I wanted to be free of the pain, the worry, the endless struggles of life. I wanted to live in that light forever, where everything made sense, where everything was clear. But that wasn't my choice anymore. I had chosen to come back. And now, I had to figure out what that meant. The days passed slowly, the routine of hospital life trying to reclaim me. Nurses came and went, doctors offered their reassurances, and friends and family sent flowers. But the more they talked, the less I could connect to them. I felt like I was trapped in a world I no longer understood, a world that no longer felt real. It wasn't just the people around me. It was everything. The air I breathed. The food I ate. The bed I slept in. All of it felt small. I felt like I was seeing through a fog, and the life I had once known seemed distant, like a memory I couldn't fully recall. I could hear the voices around me, and I could see their faces. But I couldn't reach them the way I had before. I couldn't connect. Not like I used to. And the more I tried, the more I felt the distance growing. I wanted to explain it all. I wanted to tell Barbara everything I had felt, everything I had seen. But how do you describe something like that? How do you put words to an experience that defies explanation? There were moments when I would sit quietly in my room, trying to hold on to that feeling, the feeling of peace and love that had overwhelmed me in the light. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bring it back. I couldn't recapture it. And that, more than anything, was the hardest part. I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen to return, not just for myself but for the people I loved. But returning wasn't as simple as picking up where I left off. It wasn't about going back to a normal life. I had seen beyond this world, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget it. But as much as I wanted to run back into that peace, to leave this life behind, I knew I had to stay. For Barbara. For my children. For something I couldn't yet put into words. The struggle wasn't just about adjusting to the physical pain, to the discomfort of healing. It was about coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't the same person I had been before. The world I had returned to felt strange, alien, and somehow, less. I wasn't ready to leave it all behind. But I had been given a gift, an understanding of something far greater than I had ever known. And now, it was up to me to figure out what to do with that understanding. The conflict inside me grew stronger with each passing day. The peace I had felt, the connection I had experienced, it was still there, just beyond my reach, like a memory I couldn't quite grasp. I knew there was something more to this life than the mundane, the day-to-day struggles. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still missing something. Still being pulled toward something I couldn't understand. What was it? What was I supposed to do? I didn't have answers. But I knew this, I couldn't go back to the way things were. Not ever. And somewhere deep inside, I understood that the hardest part wasn't adjusting to this new world I had returned to. It was accepting that I was no longer the person I had been. That man, the one who had lived so many years, so many days without thinking about death or purpose, he was gone. And I didn't know if he would ever come back. But whatever came next, I had to walk through it. I had to face it. Days turned into weeks. The constant beeping of machines, the hospital visits, the gentle hum of nurses as they moved through the halls, everything began to blur into one unremarkable rhythm. I had healed physically, mostly, at least, but the deeper wound, the one that had nothing to do with my body, remained. It was the wound of knowing and not knowing at the same time. The first time I tried to explain it to Barbara, I barely knew how to begin. I had so many words inside me, so much to say, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that even the most carefully chosen words wouldn't do justice to what I had experienced. I couldn't possibly describe the overwhelming peace, the love, the sensation of being truly seen by a presence I couldn't fully comprehend. One night, after the kids had gone home and the house settled into that quiet stillness I knew too well, Barbara and I sat in the living room. She was knitting, absent-mindedly, her hands working while her eyes fixed on the TV. I could hear the soft sound of the static, the faint murmur of voices from the screen, but my mind was elsewhere. "Barbara," I said, breaking the silence that had stretched between us for days. She looked up, the lines of worry on her face softening just slightly as she turned her full attention to me. I couldn't help but notice the deep concern still there, the questions she was too afraid to voice. I don't know how to say this," I began. "But I need you to understand something." She set the knitting down, her expression shifting to one of careful attention. "You're scaring me, John," she said softly. "What's going on with you? Ever since you came back, you've been different. I don't know what's happening inside your head, but I don't want to lose you." I could hear the fear in her voice, but it wasn't just for me. It was for herself, for our life, for the future she couldn't imagine without the man I used to be. "I am different, Barb," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I can't explain it in a way that will make sense to you. But I saw something real. Something beyond this world." Her eyes searched my face, trying to understand. Trying to find the man she knew. The man who had always been so practical, so grounded. But that man wasn't here anymore. Not fully. "John, you've been through a lot. You've nearly died. Maybe this is just a reaction. Maybe the trauma of it is making you—" "No, Barbara," I interrupted, shaking my head. "This isn't trauma. This is something real. Something that happened. I was shown something. And when I came back, I couldn't forget it." I paused, unsure of how to explain the inexpressible. How to give words to a reality so vast and all-encompassing that language couldn't contain it. She leaned in, her voice trembling slightly. "What did you see, John? What happened to you?" I closed my eyes, trying to recall the sensations, the vivid imagery that had filled my mind, but all I could come up with was a simple truth: I had met Jesus. "Barbara," I whispered, "I met Jesus. There." I said it. I couldn't take it back. She blinked, her hands frozen in place as she stared at me. I could see her trying to process the words. Jesus. It wasn't what she had expected to hear. It wasn't what I had expected to say. I wasn't a religious man. I'd never been particularly devout. And yet, I knew with every fiber of my being that I had seen him. "I know this sounds crazy," I continued, "but I saw him. And he told me things that I have to live by now. Things that I can't ignore." Barbara was silent, her mouth slightly agape, as if she were searching for something, anything, to say. Her eyes weren't judgmental, but they were full of confusion. "Jesus," she whispered, "are you saying you?" "I'm saying that he's real," I interrupted gently. "And I'm saying that he's calling me to change. To live differently. To do something with the time I have left." Barbara's eyes welled up with tears, but they weren't tears of fear or frustration. They were tears of sadness. She knew that I had been different, but hearing it out loud made her realize the full weight of it. She had known me for so long, and yet, now I was someone she couldn't fully understand. "John. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What do you have to do? You can't just walk away from the life we've built." I felt a pang of guilt hit me in the chest, but it wasn't guilt for what I had said. It was guilt for how she must have been feeling, for the way I was unknowingly pushing her away. The life we had built was everything to her. It had always been solid, dependable. But to me, it had become something different. A reality I was no longer certain of. "I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do," I said, looking at her with a sadness of my own. But I know this, I can't go back to the way things were. I was shown something beyond this world, Barbara. Something that has changed me. Her tears continued to fall, but she didn't say anything for a long moment. The silence in the room was thick, the weight of what I had said hanging between us like a heavy fog. Then, finally, she spoke. Her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to walk this road with you, John. I don't know what it means for us. For me. For our family. But I want to try. I don't want to lose you. I reached out and took her hand. It felt warm, steady. And for the first time in days, I felt the stirrings of something familiar in my chest. A sense of connection, however fragile, had returned. I'm not asking you to understand everything, Barb, I said softly. But I need you to try. Because I don't know what this is, but I know it's real. And I can't do it alone. She nodded, her tears still falling. But this time, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I'll try, John. I'll try. And for the first time since my return, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this journey. But the road ahead was still unclear. I had a new purpose now, but I didn't know what it was yet. I didn't know what it would mean for my life, for Barbara's, for our family. But I knew one thing, I couldn't ignore it. I had been given a message. A chance. And now, I had to figure out what to do with it. I had to walk the road that lay ahead, wherever it would take me. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed my conversation with Barbara felt both heavy and light at the same time. The weight of the truth I had shared hung over us, but there was also a sense of relief. I had said it aloud. I had finally voiced what I had known deep in my heart. I had met Jesus, and that encounter had changed everything. But now, the real challenge began. It wasn't enough to simply say it. I had to live it. I began spending more time in solitude, reflecting on everything I had experienced. I would sit in the quiet of our living room, the sunlight streaming through the windows, and I would close my eyes, trying to recapture that moment, the moment I had crossed over and stood in the presence of the divine. I tried to remember everything he had said, every word that had come from his mouth, but it was difficult. It wasn't the words that had stuck with me, it was the feeling. The overwhelming sense of peace. The boundless love that had wrapped around me, making me feel like I was home. But even as I tried to relive that moment, I found myself struggling. The life I had known, the life I had lived, seemed so distant now, so small. How could I go back to the daily grind, the routines that had once been my comfort, when I had seen something so much bigger? It was one thing to feel the presence of God in that moment, but it was another thing entirely to translate that experience into a life that was rooted in the world I had returned to. Barbara could see my internal struggle. She had been with me through so many ups and downs over the years, but this was different. It wasn't just physical recovery that I needed. It was spiritual healing, too. One morning, as I sat by the kitchen table, staring into my coffee cup as if the answers might come from the swirling liquid, Barbara joined me. "You've been quiet," she said gently, pulling out a chair across from me. She studied my face carefully. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I sighed, running my hand through my hair. "I don't know where to begin, Barb." She nodded, her eyes kind. "I think I understand. This isn't something you can just talk about in a few words." "No," I said softly. "It's not. I've seen things, Barb, things that no one can explain away. And now, I don't know how to live in this world anymore. I don't know how to go back to the way it was." She reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "You don't have to go back to the way it was. Maybe this is your chance to do something different." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so caught up in my own confusion, so worried about the life I had left behind, that I hadn't stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, this was the chance I had been waiting for. Maybe this wasn't just about going back. Maybe it was about moving forward. But what do I do now? I asked, my voice filled with uncertainty. I don't know what's next. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with this calling. Barbara paused, her eyes soft but searching. Maybe you don't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe the most important thing is that you know you're not alone in this. You have me. You have the kids. And you have your faith. Her words were simple, but they hit me in a way that was profound. I had been so focused on the overwhelming magnitude of what I had seen that I had forgotten one of the most important truths of all: I wasn't alone. I had a family. I had people who loved me. And together, we could walk this road, even if we didn't know exactly where it would lead. I spent the next few weeks in deep reflection. I began reading the Bible, something I hadn't done in years. Each passage I read seemed to speak to me in ways I had never experienced before. I found myself drawn to the Gospels, to the teachings of Jesus, the love he showed, the compassion, the forgiveness. It was as if every word was written for me, as if I was hearing it for the first time. I felt a pull toward others, too. People who had been through struggles of their own, who had faced death, loss, hardship. I couldn't help but feel that I had been given this second chance not just for myself, but for them. Barbara, always my anchor, helped me reach out to some of the people in our community. At first, it was small. I spoke with a few old friends, then neighbors. And eventually, I began to attend church. It was strange at first, walking through those doors after so many years of absence. The hymns, the prayers, they felt both familiar and foreign to me, but somehow, they felt like home. But even as I felt the pull toward faith, there were doubts that continued to linger. Could I really live up to the calling I had been given? Could I change the way I lived, the way I thought, after so many years of doing things my way? And then came the question that gnawed at me the most: had I really been chosen? One evening, as I sat alone in the backyard, staring up at the night sky, I heard a voice. It wasn't a loud voice, but it was unmistakable. Clear. Calm. You are not alone, John. I am with you. You are where you need to be. I don't know if it was my own mind, or if it was something else, but in that moment, I knew. I knew that everything had been leading me here. Every pain, every struggle, every unanswered question had been preparing me for this. I had been given a second chance, but it wasn't just to live, it was to live differently. I was not the same man who had woken up in that hospital bed weeks ago. And I wasn't the same man who had walked into the operating room, unsure of what awaited me on the other side. I was now someone who had seen beyond the veil of death, someone who had been touched by something divine. And I wasn't going to waste it. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself, not with shame, not with fear, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain. It would be difficult. I would face challenges, doubts, and moments of weakness. But I knew I was ready. Ready to walk this new path. Ready to seek redemption, to live with purpose, and to share the love and the peace that had been shown to me. The first few months after my near-death experience felt like living between two worlds. One was the life I had known before, the one that was filled with routine, expectations, and a sense of comfort that now felt shallow. The other was this new world, the one where I had seen something bigger than anything I had ever imagined, a realm where love and peace transcended the physical world. But the problem was, I was still here. Still in this world. Still in the house with Barbara and the kids. Still navigating the familiar streets of the town that had always felt so comfortable, so predictable. And yet, nothing felt the same. The colors seemed brighter, the sounds sharper, but everything felt out of place. I spent a lot of time thinking about my purpose, about what I was supposed to do now. I knew I couldn't keep going through the motions of life as I had before. I had been given a second chance, and with it came the weight of responsibility. But I had no roadmap. No guidebook to tell me how to live a life that was aligned with the experience I had been through. So, I started small. I began volunteering at the local food pantry. It wasn't much, but it was something. At first, it felt awkward, me, the man who had lived a quiet life, now interacting with people who were in need, who had their own struggles and pain. But as I spent more time there, I started to see something I hadn't expected, the power of connection. These people, the ones I had once passed by without a second thought, were struggling. They were lost, just like I had been. And yet, there was still a flicker of hope in their eyes. The way they looked at each other, the way they helped one another, it was a reflection of the same love I had felt in that moment with Jesus. One day, as I was sorting through canned goods, a man approached me. He was older, maybe in his late 70s, his face weathered and lined with years of hardship. But there was something in his eyes that reminded me of myself, someone who had been broken, someone who had been given a second chance, even if they didn't know what to do with it. "Hey," the man said, his voice gruff but kind. "I don't know you, but you seem like you've been through something. I can see it in your eyes." I looked up, surprised by his perceptiveness. "I have," I said quietly. "But I don't know how to explain it." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I could say. "I've been through a lot in my life, too. Lost my wife a few years ago. Lost my faith after that. But, you know, sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what really matters." His words hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. I had lost so much before my near-death experience, my sense of purpose, my connection to my family, my faith. But in the midst of that loss, I had found something greater. "I get that," I said quietly. "I've lost a lot, too. But I feel like I've been given a second chance. I just don't know how to make sense of it yet." The old man smiled, a weary but genuine smile. "You're not alone in that. We all have our own roads to walk. But it sounds like you're on the right one. And sometimes, just showing up, helping others, is enough." I didn't know it at the time, but that conversation would become one of the turning points in my journey. The simple act of helping others had already begun to change me. It wasn't just about volunteering or doing good deeds, it was about connecting, about showing up for others in the same way that Jesus had shown up for me. I began to expand my efforts. I joined a men's Bible study group at church, something I never thought I would do before. At first, I felt out of place, like an outsider trying to find his way in a world I didn't belong to. But over time, I began to open up. I shared my story, what I had experienced, the peace, the love, the presence of Jesus. Some of the men nodded, some were silent, and some seemed uncomfortable, unsure of how to respond. But I could see the flickers of recognition in their eyes. They didn't have to understand everything, but they knew I had seen something that had changed me. And in a way, that was enough. The more I shared, the more I realized something: living out my faith wasn't just about following rules or doctrines. It was about living authentically, about sharing the love I had been shown. And I could see that in every interaction, whether it was with the man at the food pantry, the members of the Bible study group, or even Barbara and the kids. My life was beginning to take on a new meaning. But it wasn't just about helping others. It was about healing myself. It was about reclaiming the parts of me that had been lost, the parts that had been buried under years of routine and complacency. One evening, as I sat in my favorite chair, reading the Bible, a thought struck me. I had always been someone who believed that life was about finding purpose, about making something of yourself. But now, everything had changed. Perhaps my purpose wasn't in achieving greatness or in the things I could do for myself. Perhaps it was in simply being present. In loving others. In walking beside them, showing them the love and peace that had been given to me. That night, as I lay in bed next to Barbara, I felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't the same peace I had felt when I crossed over to the other side. It was different, it was grounded, tangible, something I could carry with me every day. I don't know what the future holds, I said to Barbara, my voice soft but filled with conviction. But I know this, I'm not the man I was. And I'm not going to waste this second chance. She turned to me, her eyes filled with warmth. I believe in you, John. I always have. And for the first time since my near-death experience, I felt like I was truly living. Not just existing, not just going through the motions, but living with purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, and I knew there would be challenges. But for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what was coming. I felt ready. Ready to live out my calling. Ready to embrace whatever was next. I was no longer living for myself. I was living for something greater. And that made all the difference. As much as I had embraced the new path that life had placed before me, doubt still lingered in the corners of my mind. They came uninvited, like unwelcome visitors knocking on the door of my thoughts, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't shake them. At first, I thought it was normal, of course, I would question my newfound purpose. Who wouldn't? I had just experienced a life-altering event. But the doubts grew louder as the days went on. It wasn't just about whether or not I was living up to some divine calling. No, it was deeper than that. It was the quiet fear that perhaps I hadn't truly changed at all. That maybe, I was still the same man who had walked into that operating room, a man who had been too afraid to face the truth of his life, too afraid to be vulnerable. It was the guilt that gnawed at me, the guilt for the years I had spent ignoring my faith, for the times I had chosen to live selfishly. For all the opportunities one had missed to truly connect with others, to love and serve them the way Jesus had called me to. I sat with those feelings for days, unable to shake them. It was as if the peace I had felt right after my encounter with Jesus was beginning to fade, replaced by a quiet unease that I couldn't quite place. I began to wonder if I had truly been forgiven, or if I was still living in the shadow of my past mistakes. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the backyard, staring at the empty swings on the playset where my kids had once played. The soft breeze was the only sound that filled the air, but it felt heavy. I felt heavy. Why are you so afraid? I asked myself aloud, my voice breaking the stillness of the afternoon. I had come so far in this journey, and yet I was still fighting myself. I still felt like I was trying to convince myself that I was worthy of the grace that had been offered to me. That's when I heard it. A soft, gentle voice in my heart, clear as day, but without words. You are enough. I felt the weight of those words, and for a moment, I just sat there, letting them wash over me. I had been so focused on what I could do, on how I could prove my worth, that I had forgotten something essential. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about accepting the grace that had already been given to me. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to be the man I thought I should be. I just had to be the man I was, with all my flaws, doubts, and struggles, and trust that God would work through me, despite my imperfections. The realization hit me like a wave. I didn't have to carry the weight of my past mistakes anymore. Jesus had already taken that burden upon himself. All I needed to do was live in the light of that truth. I stood up, wiping the tears from my eyes, and walked back inside the house. I felt lighter, freer, as if the heavy chains I had been carrying had suddenly been lifted. When I entered the living room, Barbara looked up from the book she had been reading. She could see the change in my expression immediately. You look different, she said softly, putting her book down. I feel different, I replied, smiling for the first time in what felt like days. I realized something today. Something that's been right in front of me the whole time. Barbara's eyes searched mine, waiting for me to continue. I've been so focused on trying to live up to some ideal version of myself. But the truth is, I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to have all the answers. I just have to accept that I'm loved, just as I am. Her eyes softened with understanding, and she reached out to take my hand. John, you've always been enough. We've all made mistakes. We all have regrets. But it's what we do with those things that matters. I nodded, grateful for her wisdom. I think I'm finally starting to understand that. For the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of peace. The doubts that had clouded my heart seemed to dissolve, replaced by the unwavering truth that I was loved by God, just as I was. But even with that newfound clarity, the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be times when the doubts would creep back in, when I would question my worth and my purpose. But now, I knew what to do with those doubts. I knew to surrender them, to trust that I didn't have to carry the weight of my past anymore. I wasn't defined by my mistakes. I was defined by the grace that had been given to me, and that was all I needed to move forward. Later that evening, as Barbara and I sat together on the couch, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. I had gone from being a man unsure of whether I even believed in life after death, to someone who had met Jesus and been given a second chance. And while the path ahead was uncertain, I was no longer afraid. It wasn't just about what I could do for others. It was about trusting that God was with me every step of the way, that He would provide what I needed when I needed it. And that, in itself, was enough. I'm ready, I whispered to Barbara, my voice full of quiet resolve. I'm ready to live this life I've been given. To do it with love, with faith, and with trust. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. I'm right here with you, every step of the way. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I would never be alone. Life, as it often does, threw me a curveball. It was inevitable, really. Things had been moving along so smoothly for a while. The doubts I had struggled with began to settle, and I was starting to feel more confident in my purpose. I had accepted the grace I had been given, and I was living it out the best I could. Barbara and I were closer than we had ever been, and our family seemed to be healing, too. I felt like I was on the right path. But then, in an instant, everything changed. It was a late afternoon when the phone call came. I had been sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet after a long day. Barbara was inside, preparing dinner, and the kids were at their respective activities. It was one of those peaceful moments where everything felt in place. But as soon as the phone rang, I knew something was off. I picked it up, and the voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in years. "John, it's David." My heart sank. David was an old friend, someone I had known from years ago, back when I still had my demons to wrestle with. We had lost touch after I distanced myself from my old life, but I had always remembered him. David had been a constant source of trouble, always pushing the limits of what was acceptable, always encouraging me to chase after things that didn't really matter. "What's going on, David?" I asked, my voice steady despite the dread building inside me. There was a long pause. I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "John, I need your help. I don't know who else to turn to. It's about my son." My stomach tightened. "What's happened?" "He's in trouble, John. Big trouble. And I'm scared. I've tried everything, but I just don't know how to help him. He's making mistakes, serious ones, and I don't know what to do." I took a deep breath, trying to keep the panic in check. "Tell me everything. What happened?" David explained the situation as best as he could. His son, Daniel, had gotten involved with a bad crowd. He had started using drugs and running with people who were known for causing trouble. David had tried to step in, tried to get him to turn things around, but Daniel had pushed him away. The last straw had come when Daniel was arrested for a theft he had committed in a desperate attempt to get money for his addiction. Listening to David's words, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I knew exactly what it was like to be lost, to make choices that hurt those around you, to spiral into a place where hope felt distant. It was a feeling I had fought my whole life to escape, and now I was hearing about it in someone else's son. "I can't fix this, John. I don't know what to do," David said, his voice breaking. My mind raced. I knew this wasn't just about David's son. This was about me, too. This was a test of everything I had learned since my encounter with Jesus. The path I had been walking was one of service, love, and faith, but this was different. This was personal. It was painful. It was a reminder that not everything would be easy. I looked over at Barbara, who was standing in the doorway, a towel in her hands. She had overheard the conversation and was now looking at me with concern. "I'll be there," I said, my voice firm. "I'm coming to help." David's voice trembled with relief. "Thank you, John. I don't know what to say. I need you." The conversation ended with promises to meet the next day, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. Barbara walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "What's going on?" I explained everything, David's phone call, Daniel's troubles, and told her I was going to help. Her eyes softened with understanding, but I could see the worry in them. "Are you sure you want to get involved, John? It sounds like a really tough situation." "I have to. I know what it's like to feel lost. To feel like there's no way out," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This is what I've been called to do, Barb. I can't turn my back on him. On them." She didn't say anything for a moment, but then she nodded. "I trust you. Just, be careful, okay?" "I will," I promised, though even I wasn't sure what that meant. The next day, I drove to David's house, a heavy sense of anticipation pressing on my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to be there for him. For Daniel. David's house was a modest place, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. When I arrived, I could see the stress on his face, the exhaustion. He led me inside, and we sat down at the kitchen table. The air was thick with tension. David's wife was in the other room, silent and withdrawn. She had been through this cycle of hope and disappointment before, and it seemed like her hope had run out. Then, Daniel walked in. He was nothing like the boy I remembered. When I had last seen him, he had been full of life, a mischievous grin always playing at the corners of his mouth. Now, his face was drawn, his eyes dull. He didn't look at me when he entered the room, his gaze fixed on the floor. His shoulders were slumped, and it was clear that the weight of his actions had already begun to crush him. I stood up, my heart aching. "Daniel," I said gently. "I'm glad you're here." He looked up at me, but there was no recognition in his eyes. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice cold and distant. "I'm here because I know what it's like to feel like there's no way out." "I've been where you are," I said, my voice steady, though my insides trembled with emotion. "But I'm here to tell you that there is a way out. You don't have to do this alone." Daniel didn't say anything. He just stared at me, a mixture of anger and sadness flickering in his eyes. I could tell he didn't believe me. How could he? How could anyone who hadn't walked through the same darkness understand? But I wasn't there to offer easy answers. I wasn't there to fix everything in a single conversation. I was there because I knew the power of grace, the power of second chances. I knew that what Daniel needed wasn't judgment or condemnation, it was someone who would show up for him, someone who wouldn't turn their back when the road got tough. I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, Daniel. I'm here. And I'll help you find your way out of this, one step at a time." The room fell silent. David and his wife exchanged a look, one that held both hope and fear. But I could feel something in the air, an unspoken shift. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, this was the test I needed. To prove that love, grace, and second chances weren't just things I had received, they were things I was meant to give. It's funny how life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. Just when I thought I had found my rhythm, when I believed that the lessons I had learned were enough to guide me, I was thrown into a situation that shook me to my core. Helping Daniel, a young man drowning in his own mistakes, forced me to confront my past, my fears, and my own understanding of redemption. The next few days were difficult. Daniel's resistance was strong, and it felt like I was pushing against a brick wall every time I tried to reach out to him. At first, he wouldn't talk to me at all. His eyes were often cold, filled with mistrust and anger. I couldn't blame him. What could a man like me, a man who had lived a comfortable life, far removed from the kind of struggles he faced, possibly understand? But as the days went on, something began to shift. It was small, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. Daniel started talking. Not much, but just enough to let me know that he was listening. I never forced him to open up. I simply sat with him, listened, and made sure he knew that I wasn't going anywhere. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, both of us quietly watching a game on TV. David and his wife had retreated to the kitchen, and the house was filled with a strange kind of calm. Daniel, who had been silent for the most part, finally broke the stillness. "I don't know why you're doing this," he said, his voice low and uncertain. I turned to face him, surprised by the sudden question. "Doing what?" This whole thing. "Helping me." "Why?" I looked at him, trying to find the right words. "Because I believe in second chances. I believe in grace. And I believe that you can change." Daniel shook his head. "You don't get it. I've messed up too many times. There's no coming back from that. I'm not like you. I don't have what it takes to turn things around." His words hit me harder than I expected. I could feel the weight of his shame, the overwhelming feeling that he was beyond redemption. And yet, I knew in my heart that no one was beyond hope. No one. Not even me, not even him. I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "Daniel, I understand more than you think. You think I'm some perfect guy who's got it all together, but I'm not. I've made mistakes too. I've wasted years running away from what really matters. And you know what? I should have ended up just like you, lost, hopeless, and broken. But I didn't. Why? Because I was given a second chance." Daniel's eyes flickered, doubt still heavy in them. "How do you know that I can change?" I thought for a moment. "Because I've seen it. I've seen people, real people, go from the darkest places to the lightest. They didn't do it on their own. But they had someone who believed in them. And I believe in you, Daniel." The silence between us grew, but this time it felt different. There was no anger, no resistance. Just a quiet moment of connection. He didn't say anything else, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the seed of belief that, just maybe, he wasn't beyond saving. Over the next few weeks, I continued to walk alongside Daniel. I didn't have all the answers. There were no magic words that could make the pain go away or make the mistakes disappear. But I knew that showing up every day, being present in his struggle, and reminding him that he wasn't alone, was what mattered most. And slowly, very slowly, things started to change. He began attending the recovery meetings his parents had set up for him. He wasn't perfect. There were days when he relapsed, when he felt like giving up. But I stayed by his side, a constant reminder that failure wasn't the end, it was part of the journey. One afternoon, several months later, I was sitting on the porch again, just like I had been the day I received David's phone call. This time, however, the feeling was different. The air was lighter, the world seemed brighter. I was at peace. Daniel walked out onto the porch and sat beside me. He looked at me with a quiet smile, his face more relaxed than I had ever seen it. "You were right, you know," he said quietly. "About second chances. About believing in me." I turned to face him, surprised by the change in his tone. "What do you mean?" "I'm clean now," he said, his voice full of pride. "It's been 2 months since I used, and I'm doing better. I'm not perfect. But I'm trying. I felt a lump in my throat, and I couldn't help but smile. I'm proud of you, Daniel. You don't know how much that means to me. He nodded, looking out at the horizon. I don't think I could have done it without you. Without someone who believed in me. I felt a rush of emotion, something deep within me stirring. I didn't need thanks. I didn't need accolades. I just needed to know that my journey had led me to this moment, the moment where I was able to help someone else find their way back from the darkness. The day Daniel told me he was doing better was one of the happiest days of my life. It wasn't just about him overcoming his addiction. It was about witnessing the power of grace in action. It was about knowing that the lessons I had learned, the lessons I had received in the afterlife, were not just for me. They were for everyone I crossed paths with. That evening, as the sun set behind the trees and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, I realized something profound. Life wasn't about how perfect we were. It wasn't about avoiding mistakes or living in fear of falling short. Life was about love. About giving people a second chance, just as we had been given one. And that's exactly what I had been called to do. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Daniel continued to grow stronger. His transformation wasn't overnight, but it was real. And I knew, without a doubt, that he was on the path to something greater. Not just for himself, but for everyone whose life he would touch. I could only hope that, in some small way, my journey had helped light the way for him. The months that followed Daniel's recovery were filled with quiet victories and the subtle yet powerful growth of a life once lost. It's strange how, as time passes, the things that once seemed monumental become the things you remember as small, everyday blessings. I watched Daniel change before my eyes, slowly but surely. There were no miraculous transformations, no instant healings. But there was progress, a steady, persistent movement toward a better version of himself. And I was there for it, every step of the way. At home, Barbara and I had found a rhythm again. Our relationship had been strengthened, and we both knew that our lives had shifted. I could sense her peace, too, like a weight had been lifted, not just from my shoulders, but from hers as well. The love between us was deeper, richer, and we understood each other in ways we never had before. But one afternoon, something unexpected happened that forced me to revisit everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the lessons I'd learned. It was an ordinary day, the kind that feels ordinary until it becomes something else entirely. I was sitting at my desk, working on a few things, when my phone rang. It was David. "John," his voice was filled with urgency, "there's something I need to tell you." I could hear the strain in his voice, and I immediately stood up, sensing that something had shifted. "What's going on?" "It's Daniel," he said, his words tumbling over one another. He's in the hospital. He had an accident." My heart stopped. "What happened? Is he okay?" David's voice cracked. "I don't know. They haven't told us much yet, but he's in bad shape, John. I don't know what to do. I'm scared." I felt the blood rush from my face. The images of all the progress Daniel had made flashed in my mind, his smile, the hopeful glint in his eyes, and now, all I could think about was the possibility of losing him. I quickly grabbed my keys and told Barbara what was happening, before rushing out the door. When I arrived at the hospital, I was met by a stark, sterile silence. The waiting room was filled with tense families, and the air felt thick with fear. I found David and his wife, both of them looking exhausted and defeated. "John," David said as soon as he saw me, "he's in surgery. They said it's touch and go." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I wanted to believe that everything would be okay, but the fear in David's eyes told me otherwise. We sat in the waiting room for hours, the silence between us punctuated by nothing but the occasional beep of the monitors and the sound of people passing by. Time seemed to slow, stretching every minute into what felt like an eternity. Finally, the surgeon came out. I stood up before he even spoke, my heart racing. Mr. and Mrs. Turner, the doctor began, his face somber, we did everything we could. Your son's injuries were severe, and unfortunately, he didn't make it. I felt my knees go weak as the words hit me like a freight train. I had to sit down, my mind racing. Daniel was gone. Just like that. David and his wife crumbled, their grief consuming them, and I could only stand there, helpless, unable to offer them any comfort. I understood their pain, just as I had once known it. But it was so much more than that. I felt as if I, too, had lost a part of myself. All the hope, all the progress, everything that seemed like it was moving in the right direction, had suddenly been erased. I stepped away from the group, unable to process the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. I went outside, into the cool night air, and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. That's when it happened. As I stood there, struggling to find my footing in this new, unfamiliar reality, I felt a presence. It wasn't physical, but it was undeniable. There, in the stillness of that night, I felt the weight of the universe shift. And in that moment, I heard a voice. It was the same voice I had heard all those months ago. The voice that had called me back from death. John, the voice said gently, don't be afraid. I froze. I recognized the voice instantly. It was the same voice that had spoken to me when I was between life and death, the voice of Jesus. I looked around, trying to make sense of it. There was no one around, but I felt his presence so clearly. The warmth, the peace, the unconditional love, it all washed over me in waves. I know this hurts, the voice continued, but remember, there is always hope. Even in the darkest moments, you are not alone. I felt tears welling in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of understanding. The pain I was feeling, the grief of losing Daniel, it was real, but it was also part of something much bigger. This life was not the end. There was more. There was always more. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. Why him? Why now? You cannot always understand, John, he replied softly. But trust that I have a plan. Trust that Daniel's journey, though it may seem cut short, was part of a greater purpose. He is with me now, and he is at peace. And you, too, will find peace. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my heart. I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to understand everything. What mattered was the knowledge that death was not the end. That this world, with all its pain and heartache, was just a moment in the grand tapestry of existence. And in that moment, I felt a sense of calm, a profound understanding, that I had never known before. When I opened my eyes, the air felt lighter. The sadness was still there, but it was accompanied by a peace that I had never known. The grief would come in waves, but I knew now that it wouldn't drown me. And I knew that Daniel, though no longer physically with us, was in a better place, surrounded by love and light. I made my way back inside, where David and his wife were still reeling from the news. I didn't have words of comfort to offer them. All I had was the quiet strength that had come from the deep understanding that God's plan was always in motion, even when it didn't make sense. As I sat with them, I whispered a prayer. I prayed for peace. For healing. For strength to move forward. And as I finished, I knew, without a doubt, that everything I had experienced, every lesson, every hardship, had brought me to this moment. To this understanding that life, death, and everything in between were part of a much greater journey. A journey that would continue, in ways I couldn't yet see, beyond this life and into eternity. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?